the scientist who tried to outrun time. He wasn't afraid of dying. He was afraid of decay, of watching the mind slow, the body betray itself. The years quietly hollow out everything that once felt sharp. So he made a decision few others dare to make. He would test aging on himself. Today, longevity is discussed in headlines and startup pitches. But long before supplements and algorithms promised extended youth, the fear of aging lived inside individuals, especially scientists who understood in detail what time actually does to cells. To understand why this experiment mattered, we need to go back to a period when aging was still considered an untouchable fact, something to observe, not interfere with. This scientist came of age when lifespan curves were fixed and decline was expected. Medicine treated disease, not aging itself. Yet buried in early biological research was a dangerous idea, that aging might not be a single process, but a collection of failures. And if failures could be isolated, perhaps they could be delayed. He didn't wait for permission. Funding was scarce. Ethics committees were skeptical. So he began alone, adjusting his diet, manipulating sleep, tracking biomarkers that few people outside laboratories had ever heard of. His life became a living dataset, recorded in notebooks and blood samples. At first, the changes were subtle. Recovery felt faster. Mental clarity lasted longer into the day. His biological age markers shifted in the right direction, not dramatically, just enough to be unsettling, enough to suggest that time was not moving uniformly through his body. Colleagues were divided. Some called it reckless. Others quietly followed his data, because if even small delays were possible, the implications were enormous. Retirement timelines, healthcare systems, the meaning of middle age itself. But what began as controlled self-experimentation slowly crossed a line. The pursuit of longevity became personal. Each success raised the stakes. Each failure felt existential. Because when you are both the researcher and the subject, there is no distance, no abstraction. And beneath the data, a deeper tension emerged. Was he extending life, or merely postponing decline at an unseen cost? Because while time can sometimes be slowed, it has a way of collecting debts elsewhere. And soon, the experiment would force a question no graph could answer. How far can you push against aging before it pushes back? The next phase of the experiment was more aggressive. Optimization gave way to intervention. Caloric intake tightened. Certain nutrients were eliminated entirely. Others were consumed with mathematical precision. His days revolved around measurements most people never see. Insulin sensitivity, inflammatory markers, cellular repair rates. At conferences, he spoke cautiously, always framed as hypothesis, never promise. But privately, the data thrilled him. His biological age appeared to drift downward, not dramatically, but consistently. A year gained here, months preserved there, enough to suggest that aging could be negotiated. Then came the side effects. Subtle at first, cold intolerance, social withdrawal, a constant cognitive vigilance that made rest difficult. Life narrowed, slowly into a protocol. Every deviation felt dangerous. Every indulgence felt like sabotage. Colleagues noticed a change before he did. He skipped dinners, avoided travel, declined spontaneous invitations. The experiment demanded control, and control demanded isolation. The very stress he was trying to suppress began resurfacing in another form. Physiologically, the body adapted. Psychologically, the cost mounted. Sleep fragmented. Mood flattened. Pleasure became inefficient. The pursuit of longevity had begun to resemble the condition it was meant to prevent. A life extended but thin. Meanwhile, replication attempts struggled. Others followed his methods without identical results. Some improved markers. Others worsened. The same interventions produced wildly different outcomes. Aging refused to behave like a simple equation. This forced a difficult realization. Biological systems respond to context, not just inputs. The body reads signals beyond nutrition and data. It responds to meaning, stress, belonging. Factors impossible to fully quantify, yet deeply influential. The scientist faced a paradox. His numbers looked better, but his life felt smaller. And in chasing control over time, he may have surrendered something equally vital, the unpredictable richness that gives those years weight. Still, he continued, because stopping meant admitting uncertainty. And for someone who had staked his life on the idea that aging could be outrun, doubt felt more dangerous than any biomarker. But aging has its own logic, and as the experiment advanced, it began to reveal limits that no amount of discipline could fully erase. The limits appeared not as failure, but as trade-offs. His immune system grew more sensitive. Minor infections lingered longer than expected. Recovery was slower in ways the data didn't predict. The body, optimized for efficiency, had less margin for disruption. This contradiction puzzled him. He had lowered inflammation, stabilized glucose, improved mitochondrial markers. On paper, he was aging better than before, yet resilience, the ability to absorb shock, seemed diminished. Longevity, he realized, was not just about delaying decline. It was about preserving adaptability. Stress testing revealed the truth. During periods of unexpected pressure, travel, illness, emotional upheaval, his markers fluctuated sharply. The system worked beautifully in controlled conditions, but life was not controlled, and the body knew it. This forced a reckoning with a deeper concept. Evolution favors robustness, not optimization. A perfectly tuned system performs well in stable environments, but falters under chaos. Aging, in this sense, may be the cost of flexibility, the price paid for being able to survive the unknown. As these insights spread, the narrative shifted. Longevity was no longer framed in a race against time, but a balance with it. Extending life required preserving slack, space for error, room for recovery. For the scientist, this realization was unsettling. His experiment had succeeded and failed at the same time. He had proven that aging could be influenced, but he had also exposed the danger of pursuing youth too narrowly. The conflict reached its peak not in the lab, but in a personal decision. Continue pushing the protocol, refining every variable, narrowing life further, or loosen control, accept biological noise, and risk losing the gains he had fought to protect. There was no data to guide that choice, only values, only a judgment about what kind of life was worth extending. And in that moment, the experiment transformed. It was no longer about outrunning time. It was about deciding how much of life you are willing to trade to do so. The climax did not arrive with a dramatic collapse or a public confession. It arrived quietly, in the recognition that the experiment had already answered its most important question. Aging could be influenced, time could be negotiated, but not without consequence. The scientist stepped back, not completely, but enough to observe himself without obsession. He relaxed the strictest controls, reintroduced uncertainty, allowed variation back into his days. Some biomarkers drifted upward, others stabilized. What surprised him most was not what he lost, but what returned. Deeper sleep, spontaneity, a sense of psychological resilience that no blood test had captured. The resolution of this story is not a rejection of longevity science. It is a reframing of it. The pursuit of longer life cannot be separated from the shape of the life being extended. Data without context can mislead. Optimization without meaning can hollow out the very years it preserves. Modern longevity culture often promises control. Track everything. Eliminate risk. Engineer the body into compliance. But this experiment revealed a quieter truth. The body does not only age from damage, it also ages from deprivation, from the absence of flexibility, pleasure, and social connection. Longevity, at its best, is not about freezing the self in a perfect state. It is about maintaining the capacity to respond, adapt, and recover, to bend without breaking, to absorb life as it actually unfolds, not as a control protocol demands. The scientist's legacy is not his biomarkers. It is the warning embedded in his journey, that in trying to outrun time, we must be careful not to outrun living itself, because a longer life that cannot tolerate unpredictability may not be resilient enough to truly last. In the end, aging proved to be less like an enemy to defeat and more like a boundary to negotiate. one that reminds us that life is not measured only in years preserved, but in depth sustained across those years. Sometimes the smallest shift in perspective becomes the beginning of a new future,